And now, the best 60-ish seconds of your week.
May is upon us, spring is in full swing, and my allergies are at an all-time high. So please bear with me this morning for the best 60-ish seconds of your week. And please take a second to like, share, subscribe, or even comment. When you do that, it really helps us out and builds our audience so that more people can see what you take a look at every Saturday morning. And all the news is about these incredibly awful protests at college campuses around the country, most notably at Columbia University in New York, but at other places as well, where students are being prevented from going to class, especially Jewish students. Graduations are being threatened, disruption abundant, and property damage and real vandalism taking place now. And as they barricade themselves in, these immature brats now are making demands upon the university for vegan food. Are you kidding me? And the language of these people is so absurd. First of all, they talk about the Middle East situation in terms that nobody even understands, but it basically is, we hate Israel. And now they're saying no university should be allowed to deny its students the fundamentals of life, and we can't have students starving. Are you kidding? This is after less than 24 hours of being barricaded up by their own choosing. They're talking about starving to death. I mean, this is how absurd the whole thing is. But two things are fundamentally clear at this point. One, this is not a Palestinian protest. This is a Jew-hating, anti-Israel, and by extension, anti-Christian and anti-Western civilization campaign. And it's on in full swing, not just at Columbia University, but at a variety of colleges and universities across the country. We've talked a lot about the perils of higher education these days, and it's being seen in all of its awful vision right now. And where was Joe Biden? I mean, he finally came out on Thursday and made this half-hearted, moral equivalency speech. There's some bad things on both sides, and we can't have anti-Semitic speech, and we can't have Islamophobic speech, and all that. There is no moral equivalency to what's going on here. There simply isn't. And the fact that it took Joe Biden weeks to say anything, and the last time he did was on April 22nd when a reporter approached him as he was stumbling out to Marine One and asked him, and he said, oh yeah, we're against anti-Semitism, and that's why I created a program to deal. What program was that? I mean, this is the stuff that we're getting from the Biden administration. It's just all talk and nothing to back it up. When Ronald Reagan was still governor of California, he was confronted with riots in the street at Berkeley, and you saw what he did. The National Guard was out there to put things back in order as quickly as possible. Last year, at the end of 2023, I wrote a piece for several newspapers that I wrote for about the 2024 election, and I analogized 2024 to 1968. And I admitted it wasn't a perfect analogy, none ever is, but there were a lot of parallels. The one that I didn't really talk about was that 1968 turned out to be a law and order election. Richard Nixon won principally on that issue after a summer of discontent and the riots that we saw at, incidentally, the Democrat National Convention in Chicago, which we're likely to see again this year. So, although the economy will always be at the forefront and immigration is right there behind it, I want to suggest that law and order is yet another reason why Donald J. Trump is going to win and win convincingly in November. And while law and order will be an issue in the presidential campaign, law and disorder is what's taking place in a Manhattan courtroom every day. And particularly this gag order, which is unconstitutional on its face. I mean, think about it. You have a gag order preventing the leading Republican candidate for president of the United States from essentially defending himself against all sorts of onslaught by other people involved in the trial. I'm a lawyer, I don't play one on TV, but I have some familiarity with gag orders, and ordinarily they're put in place, A, to cover everybody, and B, to protect the defendants. And here, exactly the opposite is the case. Michael Cohen and others can say whatever they darn well please about Donald Trump, but somehow he's precluded from defending himself. And, this week they fined him. I'm sure he can afford the $9,000, but they're talking about putting him in Rikers Island in handcuffs. Let me just say this, politically, if that were to happen, the American people would be up in arms, and Donald Trump's numbers would continue to skyrocket. Throughout this trial, his numbers have gone up. and his lead continues to expand. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is at an all-time low. No president at this point in his presidency has had as low an approval rating as Joe Biden, and let me just say, Joe Biden deserves every bit of it. So continue to watch the show trial in New York, because the witnesses that the prosecution have brought forth thus far haven't provided anything but defense testimony. When you think about it, they're saying, one guy said, well, did you ever meet President Trump? No, I've never met Donald Trump. Another witness, these star people, Davidson, Pecker, these other assorted folks, haven't laid a hand on Donald Trump. And in fact, most of their testimony has been in his favor or to his advantage. So let's see what Alvin Bragg and company can conjure up, but there's really nothing there. And allow me 10 seconds of the best 60-ish of the week to just provide a personal note. This week I had one of the greater thrills of my young life, and I've had a lot of thrills. I was invited by the United States District Court, the federal court in Philadelphia, to come down and speak at a naturalization ceremony. What made it a particularly interesting and poignant time for me was that in the very courtroom that we stood that day, as I watched these new Americans take the oath of allegiance, I realized it was the courtroom in which I had done exactly that some years ago, where I became a naturalized U.S. citizen, a citizen by choice, not because of being blessed to be born here on American soil, but because, as I told those new Americans, we wanted it, we asked for it, and we earned it. And that really is something to celebrate in every way. And it was fascinating. All those new Americans had their little American flags that were handed to them, but so many came wearing lapel pins that they had put on themselves before they arrived at the courtroom with the flag of their new nation. And we ought to really be thrilled about that. These are people that love America and want to be part of it. And speaking of flags, when you saw those protesters tearing down the American flag and replacing it with a Palestinian flag, something that is as abhorrent as you can possibly imagine, down at the University of North Carolina, when they finally were able to get the American flag back up, it was protected by a couple of students, one of whose name was Guillermo Estrada. I'm pretty sure that he probably is not a native-born American. Maybe he is, but he's certainly first generation if he is. And that is at the core of good citizenship. And of course, it's the first Saturday in May, and today they run for the roses, the greatest 2 minutes in sports. And you always ask me each year about my picks. I usually pick the wrong ones, but Sierra Leone goes off as the track favorite, or at least the early favorite. Those lines are changing a little bit. But Chasing Freedom runs from the number 4 position, but as one of the top picks. How can you be against choosing or chasing freedom? Either one. Freedom is really what it's all about. And on a much sadder note, we always take a moment to remember those that have left us, and typically they're people that are in the media that we don't know. But this week, we laid to rest a dear friend and a great Pennsylvanian, a true statesman, and an honored gentleman, Earl Baker, who was a county commissioner, a state senator, the chairman of the Republican Party in Pennsylvania, a prolific author, a professor at Temple University, and a host of other things, including a great father and husband. He was beloved by so many, and he meant a lot to me personally and to all of us here at Quantum Communications. And Earl, we will miss you a lot, and may you rest in peace, and may God wrap you in his arms forever. Because for now, that is the best 60-ish seconds of your week.